she'd taken the flight into the wind. The pheasant had rocketed up to probably 60, 70 feet, arced over and then flown for the horizon. And she cut it off underneath and took it about 350 yards way out the air. So those are the ones, I suppose, that stand out for me.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome back for another episode of the Falconry Told podcast, and what is now the 11th episode of our series featuring falconers from the UK. And this episode, along with a couple more that you are going to hear, were recorded at one of the sponsors of this particular podcast series, Home, which is Simon Tyers, who is also the author of The Specialist Falcon. And if you haven't picked up your copy of his book yet, I highly recommend you do so. There's a wealth of knowledge in it, and there's also a lot of information on flying long wings with a lot of modern technology, including drones and other things as well. And if you also would like a signed copy, you can also order one from thespecialistfalcon.com as well. And I also have to give a shout out to the other falconer who is responsible for making this podcast series possible, being Neil Davies from Pursuit Falconry and Conservation Magazine. I highly recommend you go to pursuitfalconry.co.uk and subscribe if you haven't already. There's always lots of great new falconry content packed into each issue, along with lots of great new ads for new falconry equipment and also lots of good artwork as well. So if you haven't yet, please go and subscribe. It's well worth the money. And this was the first of a few episodes recorded at Simon's place in this lodge on his property out there. It was another really nice, aesthetically conducive place to do these recordings, and I really appreciate being able to utilize the area to get these done in. So thank you again, Simon, for allowing us to do that. And it was good meeting Dave for the first time and having a conversation with him about some of the different techniques he employs and some of his history in particular in flying Goshawks. So I think you all will enjoy this episode. There's some good information. That being said, I give you all Dave Parry. Here we go. So basically, you know, I've been told that you've been doing this for a while as well. And I mean, How long did you say you've known Simon again?
I've known, we were talking about, I was down there about a month ago and we were talking about it, and about just under 40 years now. Gotcha. Yeah. So back into the kind of mid to late 80s, really. And then, primarily through attending the British Falconers Club meetings, at the Midland Group meetings. I got to know Simon and a few other guys that were flying aspirationally my favourite bird, which is the goshawk. So I can take you through what my kind of start in falconry was, if that's what you're looking at.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go for it. Yeah, I mean, we it's one of the things we always touch on. So
yeah. I mean, I think it's a well-trodden path, really. I think we've all probably had this unaccountable fascination for birds of prey. And when I was a kid, I was I think 6 or 7, and I was, my parents were, where did this come from? And I was just constantly looking for photographs of birds of prey, falcons, hawks, eagles, anything, owls, and anyway, that continued really until my kind of mid-teens, and I'd started to do some drawing birds of prey in particular, and I used to sell the drawings for pocket money. So then I got to think, well, I can maybe get a few more drawings done, earn a bit more pocket money. And I bumped into a guy that I'd not seen for the best part of 2 years, and he was always into his hunting. Always into dogs and hunting dogs. And he mentioned to me that he bought a red tail and he started to fly a red tail. I thought, what you fly, a bird of prey? Really, I didn't think that was possible today. I know historically it was, but so I went round to see it on the basis that I wanted to photograph the bird, to draw the bird. That was the whole motivation, because I didn't think there was any chance that I would be able to fly one. And this is going back to the stage in the UK where there was no online presence. You couldn't, go online and see birds that were for sale. Very few were for sale. Very few were bred. And there was a paper you may have heard, maybe mentioned before, Cage and Aviary. It was like a newspaper, and in the back of this weekly publication, you'd have a very small list of birds that may be available. So having decided to start myself and get involved myself, I decided I'd get a red tail. The red tail seemed to be the best kind of option. My quarry available was going to be principally rabbits. So I then started phoning people, and I was phoning everybody, trying to get this. There was a list of people. I think he mentioned the guy who ultimately got it off. He had an A4 piece of paper, both sides, where his parents had taken numbers of people that wanted to buy this bird. So I was just very fortunate to be able to get this one. And so that began things for me, really. I mean, it was all then just learning. I had a mentor in the sense I had a guy that was already flying a bird, and he'd come across a lot of the hurdles, and he could give me advice on what I needed to know. But a lot of it's first hand, isn't it? And you're learning by your mistakes. You mishandle, you make a mistake in terms of how you're dealing with the bird, and you learn from that as you go. And I think I kept that bird and flew the bird for, I think, three seasons. And then this is when I met Simon. I joined the British Falconers Club, and I paid my subscription. I hadn't attended any of the meetings, and the closest region was the Midland Group, which I'm now currently a member of as well. But back in the day, it was everyone looked forward to the end of the season weekend field meet, where John Fairclough, who was the director at the time, and Simon worked for John, would host this end of season 3-day meet, 2 or 3 day meet, and we'd meet in the hotel that John owned at night and have a meal and drink till the early hours. But I first met Simon then, and there was I think a guy you're meeting later today, Ian Butler. He flew Gosses at the time. Simon was flying a Goss. A guy called Mick Fox, who was who sadly is no longer with us, but he flew a female Goss, and another guy called Sam Rice. So I was exposed for the first time, having flown a red tail at rabbits, to what a Goss could do. And it was like, Jesus Christ, how these things were so quick. They were so committed. Red tails are great birds, absolutely brilliant birds. But when a Goss is off the fist at a rabbit, and the red tail's off the fist at the rabbit, then there's no comparison in terms of acceleration. So that's the dynamism that you see immediately. So I decided that I was going to attempt to place the red tail with someone, and then move on to a Goss if I could get one. And at the time, I think female Goshawks were about £2,000 a bird then, and you're going back now, 30 odd years, so it's a lot of money to part with. And I'd spoken to Simon, we got to know each other quite well, and I'd said that I wanted to fly Goshawk, and at that time the club were bringing in Goshawks from Europe, and they were bringing them in. There could be branches, there could be birds that have been caught relatively quickly after they'd left the nest, or occasionally it could be passage birds. So Simon had put some feelers out for me, and there was a guy, I think in Nottingham, who was looking to move a bird on that he'd had for one season. And what I'd heard about the bird was that it was called a lot, and I was thinking imprint, it's got to be an imprint, the kind of behaviour that was being described. And anyway, I decided to get the bird, so I picked it up, and it turned out to be a passage bird. And I was absolutely, I thought all Goshawks did this. I picked the bird up, and I booked my holiday in Caithness, and I went to Caithness and took the bird up. And it was just catching rabbit after rabbit after rabbit. And it was doing things like, I remember one day it was a pigeon had flown over, and the bird watched the pigeon fly, and it fluttered to the ground just over the horizon. And the Goss flew off the fist at 45 degrees, found a gully, and went down the gully. And next thing I see is this pigeon going vertically and the goss trying to pull it out of the air. So all those things that I thought were then, I didn't know the bird was a passage at that time, because I thought all goshawks did that, and ultimately they will, but this one knew it already. So anyway, after flying that bird for I think 3 seasons, I decided I didn't, because the whole purpose of bringing the birds in was for the club to establish a breeding population. So at any point, the club could have said, right, we need the bird back now, we're going to put it in the breeding population, a breeding program. So I decided that I needed to own one. I needed to get my own. I needed to start from scratch and fly that, train that bird myself. So I then bought an Eyas, a parent-reared Eyas, Finnish German cross, and I trained that bird, and then that was my kind of main bird for the next 5 years or so. I used to take her up to Caithness every year. I'd have all my holidays booked, negotiated with my boss that I could have this block of time, and I'd just get in a car, take my dogs up, take the hawks up, and just fly the bird every day. So that was the start, really. I mean, that was the first parent-reared goss I'd trained and flown, and I was flying then exclusively at rabbits, nothing else. So I didn't have access to ground with pheasants on. It was beyond me really to participate in the shoot and buy in and stuff. So I would go up, as I said, to Scotland. A girlfriend would come up and she'd film the flights, and then we had all these rushes, all these snippets of flights that were really just for my benefit. And I thought, well, maybe put this into a video. So I made a video back in 1994, and I think I called it Bird of the Fist, right? But it was super VHS tape, so the quality, nothing like digital. And I was selling some of these tapes. Anyway, I stopped doing that after a while, and I found the tape a few years ago, and even it was VHS will degrade over time, so you lose that footage. So I digitized it, and I've just stuck it on YouTube for people to watch if they want to watch it. So it's on there. But then, as I say, I mean, having gone up to Caithness every year, I think for about 10 years, one of the times I was up there, I met a very good friend of mine now, Andy Hollinshead, who breeds goshawks, has bred goshawks for a long time. One of those crazy situations, I'm going down a single track road, he's coming the other way. I see the lights go on as the people recognise there's a bird in the back of the car, and I'm thinking, oh no, the goss is going to go mad. So I disappear, and he chases me for about 5 miles, and we ended up having a chat, and I saw his bird fly, and that was the first time that I'd seen a social imprint goss fly, and I was absolutely blown away at the strength, the vigour, the power of this bird, because I was flying a bird that probably physiologically wasn't as good an example of a goshawk as Andy's was, because they're just genetically, they're all different, aren't they? And she was very efficient and very good at what she did, but very no particular flair about the way she flew. Andy's bird was incredible. So I then thought, I need an imprint. I've got an imprint ultimately. I'm going to keep this bird going because I want to fly the bird I've got, but I've got room in my life, to have another one. So I thought I'd get an imprint. And Andy very kindly agreed to imprint a male for me. And I had quite a few seasons with socially imprinted male, and that was phenomenal hawking, stress-free hawking. This bird would see you and come back from anywhere. If he could see it, it was on its way back if he called it. And very, very aggressively hunting quarry, could take rabbits, pheasants. So that was my kind of, I've flown a couple of imprints, but predominantly I've flown parent-reared birds. And I think of all the types of bird, whether it's, the species has got to be a goshawk for me. I prefer a female's flight style to a male generally. The quarry base I now fly at, I fly exclusively at pheasants. And where I fly, there's some huge cockbirds. Males are not always true, but males sometimes struggle with cockbirds and turn off cockbirds eventually because they get a beating. So I think the females have given me more of what I was looking for, really. And I don't have a view really in terms of whether parent reared or imprint. I think they're both goshawks, and what you're trying to do is you're taking that bird on a journey to end up in ideally the same place, but you're starting at a different point. So your management's got to be slightly different.
Yeah, I really like you to kind of expound as much as you can on your views on that, because while we try not to go too much into the opinionated type of things with viewpoints of my way's better versus whatever and that kind of stuff, but I am curious to hear what the reason why you prefer one over the other more so, and kind of the things that maybe you have done that you realize that you could have done a lot better to maybe change the outcome of one versus the other. Go into that a little bit, because I think it's good for especially some newer people coming up, and whenever they, like in our country, you have to become like a general falconer, general level, before you can get an IS and imprint it and things like that. So for people that may be listening that are kind of trying to teeter on that decision, that are getting ready to upgrade their license, things like that, it might be good for them to hear. So,
some of this is what I've heard rather than experienced, though. But these are from sources that I really rate. So, I guess firstly, the thing I'd say is, for me, the reason I prefer parent-reared birds is purely probably because that's where I started, if I'm honest, and I seem to do better with them. I seem to get more out of them than I do out of the limited number of imprints that I've flown. Having said that, I've seen some fantastic imprint goshawks. It's just guys who've, there's no, you couldn't put a piece of paper between them in terms of their hunting capability. And I think it's then a question of what you're looking for from the bird, really. Because the commitment you've got with an imprint is, in the summer you can't put it in a seclusion area. You've got to interact with it. You've got to keep the relationship to some extent going. If you could do it, but you'd pay the price, because you'd have to probably drop the weight below where you ideally want it, and then you might get some behavioural issues that come out of that. So, for me and what I'm looking for, I prefer parent reared. Now, having said that, one of the big reasons that people historically have said, if you have an imprint, they're going to be vocal. Mine's vocal. She's parent reared. Most parent reared goshawks I've had have been vocal, and that's not because I think you can manage them in a way to avoid that, but I exercise and feed her at my house, in the garden, and there's a territorial element that builds up over time. So if you're going to exercise a bird in that way and feed it immediately around the house you live in, you're probably going to have a vocal bird, whether it's parent reared or imprinted. Some of the quietest birds I've actually seen have been imprints, 2, 3, 4 years old, where they're settled and they've been absolutely silent. So you get the benefits of everything. You've got a placid bird that's really tame, that's really well adjusted and not vocal. But for me, I like the idea of getting a bird at 10 weeks old that's not been touched by anybody, that's fully grown, and taking that journey with the bird, really. Because what you do with an imprint effectively is all the manning's done, a lot of the manning's done during the imprinting process, isn't it? So effectively what you're doing is you're exposing that bird to everything that it's likely to come across as it's being flown in an intense period, where you're taking advantage of the mentality of a nestling, which will stay in the nest regardless of what happens. It's absorbing everything like a sponge, isn't it? So this is what imprinting delivers, isn't it? So, but I like going to pick that bird up, fully feathered, not been touched, and then starting the process of manning. And then, so I guess my birds perform better now than they have done historically is where I spend time a lot of time on fitness development. So when I pick the bird up, perhaps just take step by step through that. Really, the first thing you get is a bird that is physically not developed at all. It's not strong. It's not really finished its growth at that point. So what I try and do is keep the weight as high as I can for as long as I can. And then as soon as I've got the bird responding to me, I try and encourage it then to come to me, obviously, and all the steps you would go through, all the traditional steps you'd go through. I then use a retractable dog lead, which is about 10 meters long. It's got a drag on it of about a pound, slightly more than a pound. And every time I feed, and I do this every day, I don't fly her, I call her to the fish repeatedly for measured amounts of food. And I know based on what she has and how much exercise she goes through, what her weight will be at a given time the following day. So I can manage quite precisely on that basis. I suppose I'm meandering a bit, but if all goshawks, regardless of imprint or parent reared, key message for me is you will they're all goshawks and they're all capable of producing that quality that you're looking for. It's then a question really of the living with the bird and what you are looking for from the interaction with the bird. I can see the benefits and the attraction of imprints. I personally choose parent reared because I see more in that I respond to and I want. So neither is better than the other, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand, like I said, like we talked about earlier, basically personal preference is what it is. Everybody has theirs. Yeah. But I think, there's some guys that I know that love imprinting and just love the process of actually the whole raising from day, whenever they, pull the bird from the nest and, like they want to have complete and total control over the upbringing, the socialization and all that. There's other guys that I know that love chamber raised, parent reared, and they think that, that you can avoid a lot of the behavioral problems that you can easily, kind of instill if you mess up the imprinting process. Yeah. So, but the trade-off is you might not have some of the other imprint benefits like you were describing. One way or the other, like you said, eventually you're both trying to get to the same point where you have a bird that takes game, has a great flight style, and very fit and all that. But I mean, like as far as some of the issues that you've ran into one versus the other. I mean, you already kind of touched some on the vocalization. I mean, what are some of the other pluses and minuses that you've seen, with one versus the other personally?
I would say imprints that I've seen generally are far more responsive in terms of recall. But that can be achieved. When I'm on my own with my parent reared goss, it'll come back like an imprint. It'll see me, it'll come back. But if there's anything that distracts it, then the obedience does suffer slightly. So that's a downside of a parent reared bird that you can overcome by intensive manning. You keep that manning process up. You can overcome those, provided you can anticipate what those distractions are likely to be. In terms of what I've heard, and I've seen some evidence of, is imprint females can display some, at certain stages of their training, they have a tendency sometimes, not all the time, to demonstrate aggression. But that's how you manage it then. And I think interesting what you said about you need to achieve a certain level of proficiency before you're allowed to imprint a bird in the States. An imprint of any sort, from what I've seen, is not to be taken lightly. It's not to be taken lightly, and it's not a bird that you should start with, generally speaking. I'm sure there are exceptions to that, but it's easier to mess up an imprint than it is to mess up a parent reared bird.
Sure.
I think you're dealing with a different mentality, aren't you?
Sure. Yeah. No, and that's, like I said, I was curious to see your point of view on it from someone that's flown quite a few, and like part of the reason why I was curious is because you've basically reiterated a lot of things that I've also heard. I mean, I've definitely not flown one, but I've seen quite a few flown since literally day one of my experience in falconry. And I've seen both types, imprint and chamber raised, and I've definitely seen the benefits of both, and I've seen the downsides of both too. But that, like I said, that tells me a lot. It tells me that what I've seen and what I've heard both have been pretty consistent across the board. Especially with that particular species. So, but I want to go back a little bit and touch some on what you briefly touched on with some of the conditioning aspect, because that's interesting what you were saying about the retractable collar, and go in a little bit more detail with that part of the regimen, because I think there's a lot of guys that are always interested in hearing different thoughts on that too.
It's not my idea, this at all. I mean, this is something that in fact it was introduced to me by a guy called Chris Paget, who again is sadly no longer with us, but he conceived of an exercise regime. I mean, historically, people will, jump hawks, so they'll have, the high jumps, and they'll stand on a ladder and get the bird to fly up to them repeatedly and try and condition the bird that way. But if you think about what you're looking for the bird to be strong and good at, is horizontal flight. You want all those muscles developing as effectively as you can, and aerobically the bird to be breathing hard and exercising to the point where it's exerting itself as it would in a flight. So, I mean, if you look at what you're looking for from a goshawk flight, what I'm looking for, and most of the people who fly gosses I think are looking for, is the goss doesn't miss a wing beat. It pumps all the way. That 100% focus on overhauling the quarry isn't hampered by lack of physical conditioning. You want that bird to be as fit as you can get it. And if a bird's flown every day and flown hard every day, it will acquire that fitness anyway. So this becomes a supplement that allows you to maintain condition when you're otherwise unable to fly the bird. And I'm sure it would work for other species, as well. I've never tried it with a redtail or a Harris, and the reticence that some people have with it, and I understand it, is that there's strain on the legs of the bird repeatedly. So is this something that would cause a problem? And it hasn't with me. I suppose if you look at the forces at play when a goshawk nails a jackrabbit or a hare, though the whole physiology of the bird is designed to absorb all those stresses, and this is quite a relatively gentle pull.
Yeah, I was going to say it's more of a resistance instead of just a hard, just instant, sudden impact kind of.
Yeah. The key thing you need to do to avoid any or reduce any risk of strain is to design your exercise system so that when the bird leaves the perch to come to you, there isn't a marked jerk. Because that seems to me to be, that's where the bird's surprised and it's not ready, and all of a sudden it jerks and something gets strained. And so you can set it up in a way that as soon as the bird leaves the perch, it's immediately under stress in terms of the drag on the lead, so it doesn't have that jerk. So I get to the point where I count wing beats. I think she's working that's 14 wing beats and 10 meters. She's working really hard. Barely makes the fist, but makes it. And then after a few days, you'll see she make the fist a bit better, a bit easier. Then you can maybe use an incline, so you can call to an elevated position where she's using horizontal flight plus the capture upswing at the end. And you're trying to build all those kind of things into the conditioning. And all I can say is it's been fundamentally a massive change to the quality of the sport that I've experienced. I wouldn't do anything else, and unless somebody comes up with a different type along the same basis that does it better, but I can't see how that can be done. So when I take the bird out, look at an IS, I don't fly her until she's fit. Never fly her until she's. I don't go out trying to catch pheasant poults with an unfit goshawk. I get with imprints that there are different reasons to enter them early and all those things, but I'm talking parent reared really. And I'll spend really from September through till probably end of October getting the bird manned, obedient and fit. And when she goes off the fist at the first pheasant, and they will, they don't need to be, shown what a pheasant is. When it flaps up in front of them, they know what it is. She's equipped with as much fitness and condition as she can have to ensure success. And when she catches that first pheasant, and it might be the first one she sees, and it might be the 10th one she sees, but she gets rewarded for it. And the other thing that I do that, again, this isn't me saying this is the only way to do it. This is just what works for me, and that's single kills. So if I go drive to my ground, which is an hour and a quarter away, and I take the dog out and go on the hill and flush a pheasant, and she kills that pheasant in the first 20 minutes, that's the day done. But by the same token, she flies all day and gets the opportunity all day to catch a pheasant, and she might fly half a dozen. And what you're doing by that one kill approach, I think, is you're kind of buying the performance on the blank days. I can take her out on a blank day and she's flying just as hard on the fifth flight as she was on the first, because she knows what she's going to get at the end of it. So that's what I like to do. For me, that works the best. So the conditioning around the feeding, the other thing I'd add there is what I've started to do is supplement the food with water. So even though it's not, it's quite cold here in November time, when they're exerting themselves, if you look at a goshawk on a perch, when it's breathing out, you can see its breath. It's losing moisture all the time. And when it's panting and it's coming to you repeatedly, it's losing more moisture. It's got to be. So what I do is weigh the food first. I add supplements of Vitahawk, and then I'll add some water, so that every morsel of food she gets is coated in water. She's not being force-fed loads of extra water, but she's getting additional moisture. And I think that helps as well, given that she's exerting herself so much and losing that extra moisture. It seems to help.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, if the bird's going to get dehydrated just like any other person or animal, for sure. But now, and out of curiosity too, I know, and kind of going back, just touching on a little bit of the difference too, is the stress levels sometimes between an imprint versus a chamber bird. Like I know, like in a climate, say where I live, it's a lot harder to keep one healthy at times. Whenever with the weight management aspect, because they're a lot more prone to asper than some other species, and we kind of run into that a lot sometimes when, especially if you're bringing one down in weight and it's stressed at the same time and all that kind of stuff, they can sometimes get more prone to it and be more likely to die. But I mean, with the way the climate is here and with the way you manage, the food and weight for your birds, have you noticed any like real difference in that? I mean, what do you like to do? Do you like to gradually taper, the weight down through the week, or do you like to maintain a consistent weight, or what's your approach with that?
During the flying season, I'm looking for a consistent weight. So every single day I want to try and hit that weight. Having said that, I want the bird to be at the top end of its weight range. So if I take the bird I've got now, she came out of the aviary second season, 3.4 pounds, and she killed her first pheasant at 3.5 pounds an ounce. So this is a bird that's in a chamber, been cut down slightly, so she was probably 3.5 but by starting off the exercise program, obviously you're building muscle and reducing fat, aren't you? So increasing appetite effectively. So when I was on my own, I could take her out at 3.5 pounds an ounce. It came back really well. So that is she will fly at the end of the season reliably at about 215, 215 and a half, but that's fully muscled and that's been out, through the season in company on field meetings. Whereas I would be, and I did try this last year. I took her on a field meeting when she was £3.5 an ounce, and I'm not doing that again.
Yeah.
But when the bird's at the top end of its weight range, and I think another thing you get from imprints is that they're relatively flying in a higher condition often. That you do benefit from that.
Yeah, I've seen it done both ways, and it seems like I've seen it done both ways successfully with guys that I know. There's some guys that I hunt with that fly Goshawks that they work a lot through the week, so the weekends are their primary times to hunt. So at times they'll feed up a lot at the beginning of the week, and then gradually through the course of the week taper down. That way they don't have to worry about any kind of as many health issues if they're starting with the stress issue and that, and they can kind of taper through the week, but then like I've seen them also work with the consistent weight approach too. I've seen it done successfully both ways, but some guys claim that they have more health issues with one versus the other potentially, but
it'd be interesting to see the evidence for that, wouldn't it? And record the evidence for it, see what that shows. Because when I'm retired now, but for years I was working 9 to 5 days a week, flying at weekends. But I used to come home and I used to exercise the bird on the dog lead every day, and I keep the weight stable right the way through, to the point where on the Friday I wouldn't drop the weight, but I would not feed casting on the Thursday and feed enough to keep the bird level for Saturday morning. So I'd exercise in the morning before going to work on that one day, and in the evenings the rest of the day. But the weight was pretty much stable all the way through. There might be some climatic differences that cause the health issue. Here, I've not experienced it myself.
Yeah, where we live, it gets very hot and very humid.
Nice.
95 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit with 100% humidity.
Yeah.
So I mean, it can get pretty nasty in the Midwest where we live at times. But no, well, and so when you say exercise, so it's not affecting the bird's tenacity or will to hunt as you're exercising through the week and doing like glove recall and things like that. You're not facing any issues,
nothing. Not with the birds I've flown.
They don't get glove bound or anything like that.
Well, I mean, I don't know what. I've never done this with an imprint, so I've never done all the imprints. I've never done it. I've done it with a male, and I didn't see any issues with the male. That's not to say that's one imprint Goss, so I can't speak with any authority about what the impact of calling to the fist repeatedly during the week for an imprint might be.
It'd probably be a lot less desirable.
Yeah,
would be my guess. But
I mean, but the imprints I've seen loads of imprints flown to the fist reliably without calling to a law and perfectly well behaved. So I think. A lot depends on your reading of the individual bird, doesn't it? So, and what you condition them to as well. I think, but it certainly works with parent rear birds. I mean, I've flown a number of goshawks on that regime over a long space of time, and haven't seen a reduction or an issue with a performance or a behavioural problem.
Oh, that's fascinating. No, and I think there's a lot of guys that might overlook that because. I don't know, like I can see where the thought would be potentially that maybe you're going backwards, and, the trying to keep your recall intact and the hunting part, kind of happens naturally the more you hunt the bird anyway. But I can see where some guys would think that, you're just reinforcing more glove issues potentially or something with that. So that's why I asked. That's really interesting though.
Yeah, it might be that the imprint dimension does complicate that, and whether you could replicate the calling off regime to a law instead of a glove. I don't know. It might be logistically harder to do.
Yeah,
but certainly that's where parent reared birds certainly would be fine.
Well, and as you said
my
too,
experience.
and you made a good point also, it's like every bird's different. And
Yeah.
sometimes you just got to read the individual
That's
bird.
it.
If the bird is kind of acting like it might,
Yeah.
have an issue with that, then yeah, you're going to have to change what you're doing.
Yeah.
But no, that's very cool. I mean, I appreciate you going a little bit into more detail with the more specific aspects of that, because like I said, we're a lot more interested usually in, of course, getting people's stories and how they get into this, and different stories and things like that they have. But I had been told beforehand and warned beforehand that you have some interesting approaches to some of that, so I definitely wanted to touch on it. So I appreciate you sharing that. But as far as the other aspects of things that you've done, you mentioned that you did the whole video deal, and so I mean, there's some other guys that I know of that have done, that have done the video deal and made some stuff like that. But I mean, how long did it take you to compile that?
Well, I had a very patient girlfriend at the time who used to come out with a huge video camera, a Super VHS full-size tape in it. You can imagine the size of the camera. And she'd stand there patiently waiting for the flight, and we just ended up with loads of footage. So the business I worked in, there was a guy who was into his video editing, and he had all the relevant software, and he offered to do it for me. So we put a music soundtrack on it with some rock music, which is not to everybody's taste, but there was just flight after flight after flight. So it wasn't a particularly time-consuming thing. Once I had the raw material, it was really sitting down for a few days with the guy and piecing it together.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it wouldn't be very intensive for you if you had everybody doing your work for
Exactly.
you. In that case. Smart man.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Smart man.
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
That's great. Yeah. And you just made the one video?
Yeah, I try as far as I can, like many of us, to capture footage on my phone of flights that throughout the season, because it's great to play those back, But yeah, I've only made the one video. That's a kind of an end-to-end product, really.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, going back and kind of finishing up the thoughts, I like I said, that popped into my head, so I wanted to make sure to ask if you had any other videos or anything that were available for people to potentially see. But popping back over to kind of the final wrap-up thoughts on the Goshawks, I mean, is there a particular hybrid or species that you kind of prefer over the other? Or
I would say, I mean, my experience has been with either pure Finnish birds or Finnish crosses, and the key thing that I think with any parent reared bird, but Finnish birds seem to be more, less afraid of you to start with. They're more chilled generally. The one I've got now was pulled out of the pen. I took her home, and within 2 days she fed on the fist, and she was not fazed by anything. Her natural mindset was, I'm not sure about that. I'm not going to bait away from it because I'm not scared of it, but I'm not sure yet. So it was that kind of thing. It was quite an easy journey with it. I've had other ones that have been a little bit more of a challenge, but I think a lot of the historical perception of parent reared birds in the UK was born of all the birds that were imported back in the ones I mentioned earlier, where they'd be caught up, they'd be put in a box, they'd be shipped across to the country, they'd be put in quarantine. Parent reared birds, all of them, and then someone would try and undo all that. So then you've got all the psychological things that you've got to try and undo and then build back. And I think that's probably, to some extent, I'm sure there is a case for saying that some of the southern latitude birds are naturally more wilder and perhaps need more manning. But I think that didn't help that they had that start in life. So then their reputation grew from that to some extent. I prefer Finnish birds, and I prefer 100% Finnish if I can get them. And the one I've got now is bred by a guy called Glyn Thompson, who produces some excellent quality birds. And I was introduced to when I was looking for one 2 years ago, and I'm glad I did.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I've got a couple buddies that have flown the either pure finish or finish crosses, and I think that's kind of been what they've evolved to. Also, they kind of prefer the finish as well, because I mean their temp, and I have seen their temperament versus the North American birds and or even the North American crosses and stuff, and it does look quite a bit calmer, for overall.
Yeah, I mean, I remember reading a book by Frank Beebe on one of his books, whether it was North American Falconry and Hunting Hawks, but it was he said that in the States or in Canada, the effort associated with getting a northern latitude goshawk on the American continent was worth doing because of the temperamental benefits you get. So I wonder whether it's a latitude thing. You get the more north. I don't know why that would be, but it seems to be common from his experience, from what I read, to what we see. So
yeah, who knows? I mean,
there's a lot more information we can probably get on that by.
Oh yeah, well, hooling, for every falconer, there's 10 theories for every subject, and an opinion for each one of those. 100 opinions for each one of those theories too. So I mean, run into that also. But well, let's kind of transition then to you already kind of shared sort of a story or two with your. Talking about your initially getting into the sport and all that, but I think it's time now for you to go ahead and share, if you can, the one or two either stories that pop into your head as far as flights, hunts, or whether it be a particularly special bird that you've had, and just go ahead and share those with us.
I mean, I guess when I started, the first bird I flew was my first goshawk, so that was one that will always hold a place in my memory, I guess. And I was flying rabbits at the time, and she would take confidently 8-9 rabbits a day, and numbers was part of the kind of benchmark of how well I'm doing as a falconer, and I think single kills now when I'm flying game. It's closer to what happens in the wild. A wild bird doesn't go and catch something generally, have its fill and go and catch something else straight away, does it? Or even take a small bite out of it and then go and catch something else. So I think you're trying to capitalize on the inbuilt genetic underlying potential for that bird, or the behavioural characteristics of that bird, and I think single kills does it for me. Also, I don't want to kill a lot of pheasants. I like pheasants, and I like hunting them, but I'd rather see a 600, 700, 800 yard flight of a goshawk that's tried its hardest and that pheasant escapes, and to still maintain that by getting success in other flights, but absolutely brilliant to watch it. The land I've got down in Shropshire is on the Long Mynd, and it's some days in the season, very, very few, but you can get the cockbirds up on the top of the hill, and when they come off the top and they don't miss a wing beat, they're coming down to the wood, and the birds coming after them. Those are the days, really. Those are the flights I remember. But any pheasant flight where the pheasant tries its hardest and the goshawk tries its hardest, regardless of the outcome. You just see the way that both try, and we put on this shoot, we put a lot of X-layers down last year, and they're a different. I know in the States you don't probably do it the same as us, but we repopulate areas with either poults at the start of the season or X-layers or cockbirds from a previous season, and release those on the hill and put food out for them. They're wild birds and they stay on the hill, and they're on there for months. And but X-layers that have been on a shoot and survived for one more seasons fly completely differently to a bird of the year. They've got the strategies nailed. The dynamics of the flight are different. And they're brilliant to watch. So that in terms of individual flights, I can't say that any particular one stands out apart from the objective of getting that doesn't miss a wing beat flight. And if you see a goshawk fly after quarry and it's absolutely committed, it tilts its body forward, its body doesn't move. It's only the wings that move. And it just rose after this, the pheasant. And the pheasant knows what's coming. It's trying its hardest to escape. And that's ultimately, ideally, the best would be, say, it out the air. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes it does. And yeah, it's happened with the birds I've got. The one I've got now, took one last season on a grouse moor, where they put down a limited number of pheasants, and she'd taken the flight into the wind. The pheasant had rocketed up to probably 60, 70 feet, arced over, and then flown for the horizon. And she'd cut it off underneath and took it about 350 yards away out the air. So those are the ones, I suppose, that stand out for me. But it's not all about that. There's everything else. And what we haven't mentioned is working dogs. Dogs are critical. And a good dog delivers so much more in terms of the quality of sport you see.
And what breed do you prefer for that?
I used to work spaniels, and they're great, but they require a lot of intervention, a lot of management. So you're pepping the whistle all the time and turning them and directing them. And I now run a German wire-haired pointer. So they're relatively require less management. They become very hunting orientated, and they'll point game and then flush game on command. So that enables you to cover an awful lot of ground relatively quickly, whereas a spaniel tends to stay in a kind of 30-yard radius, in my experience. A pointer can be 100 and 150 yards, 200 yards away and still work in the hill. So you're covering a lot more ground more quickly.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, you're right, and thanks for prompting that, because especially the guys that are proficient with it and incorporate dogs into their hunting team, that's just as important as the bird or anything else. That selection, I should say. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, so have you been hunting with dogs primarily like from the get go, or like?
Yeah, when I started, I didn't. So I tried to fly goshawk without a dog, and in Caithness at that time, there were enough rabbits to allow you to walk along the hill and the bird to see when you go. But when I met Simon was very into his training his spaniels and working his spaniels for the field mate, and I saw them working, and I was great. I got as much information as I could from Simon, and I took a couple of dogs over the course of the next half a dozen years or so that had kind of finished their trialing life, so maybe 5 years old, but they had an awful lot of work, very experienced dogs, and I just ran them on to retirement, and they stayed with me then. But I used to work those, and but I think HPRs are the preferred partnership between goshawk and dog for me in terms of the ground I've got and the type of hawking I do.
Great. Well, cool. We've covered a lot. So I think also what I really would like to go ahead and get your opinion on too is you're a member of the club here, right?
Yes.
The BFC. So,
yeah.
What are your thoughts on, do you recommend that anybody that listens to this maybe here in the UK, do you recommend that they go with that if they're
very much so. I think if someone wants to participate in the sport, they absolutely need guidance. One of the things that the sport struggles with, I think, at the moment is the number of birds that are available and the lack of criteria associated with someone buying one. They can go onto a magazine or online and they can pay their money and they take the bird. Breeders, I have great sympathy and great respect for people who breed hawks, because without them we wouldn't have sport in the UK. I think the issue is probably more about birds being handed on. I think breeders, or the ones I've met, are very concerned to make sure that those birds go into the right hands. But when they're sold on, they've got no control. And the number of Harris hawks that are lost here, flown without telemetry, those sorts of things shouldn't happen. And correctly mentored, people would find methods to avoid that happening. And clubs are a really good starting point. You can acquire a mentor. You can exchange information. You can learn from people. You can go out and see hawks flown. I'm a member of the British Falconers Club and also the Welsh Hawking Club. There are other clubs in the UK, but the most important thing is to get a mentor who is skilled and experienced in the type of hawking you want to do. Obviously, you need land, you need access to game. All those things influence your choice of hawk, and also the practicality of you actually entering the sport at all. But the mentor will enable you to learn from somebody else's mistakes, not your own.
For sure, yeah, and I think that most guys that have been doing this for a while, even the ones that haven't, quickly learn the value of having somebody to show you what you're doing and what you're doing wrong.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. I mean, you can learn from other people's mistakes just as readily as you can your own. Yeah.
And I think the welfare of the hawks as well. It's sad to see that someone getting a bird that no doubt they really want to fly that bird, and they've got the emerging, passion for the sport, but they're able to get a bird too soon. They get the bird and the bird suffers because the housing isn't right, the regime isn't right, the equipment isn't right, the telemetry isn't used, all those things that would avoid all those problems. The bird pays the price at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, all of us make mistakes, but yeah, to be able to have at least that initial guidance and, just that that initial that mentorship is invaluable. Yeah. Because I mean, there's a lot of things that you can't avoid doing wrong if you just have that versus not. But yeah, no. So I guess this would be a good time to go ahead and ask you if there's any other little pearls of wisdom or bits of advice that you would have to pass on to other generations or even people that are currently practicing, and probably end on that note.
Probably, I mean, I've flown a number of different goshawks, and those have gone back into breeding arrangements, and I've then had young and so on. But I think the commitment is the thing that people need to understand, what the lifestyle choices that they're making, because there are prices to pay for doing falconry and doing it well, and that's all the other bits, So most falconers, in my experience, have got a fairly rocky marriage history. I've got 2 divorces behind me, so. But I think it's understand what you're taking on, and that's all back to the mentor thing again. Really, that's making sure that you do the research, you get the guidance. You don't just think you can do it because it is available. When I started, there was less available. Now there's a lot of stuff online for people who want to kind of understand the basic grounding of stuff. You might, with everything, you might not agree with everything that's said, but it's information that just was not available previously.
No, there's a lot of to get at least the initial. That initial, okay, what is this? What exactly am I going to have to commit to do this? And just that initial, and I think most importantly for myself was spending a season just getting out and seeing how it's done.
That's crucial. I think. Absolutely. You really understand it, and I think the overhead of time, the what if things go wrong, how access to veterinary care, access to food supplies. Access to appropriate housing, appropriate land, appropriate quarry, all those things together, really. And if you can square all those off and you can get the guidance, then do it.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Well, on that note, I think that it's time to maybe go pester Simon and force him to make us something to eat.
Oh, that'd be nice.
Yeah. And I mean, we'll have to suffer his presence again for a little bit longer, but
at least he's got the chef's hat on.
Well, yeah, chef's hat, and I think the beer is in the fridge in his house. So, I mean, we kind of have to. There's never mind. There's some right over there too. So maybe we don't have. Maybe we could just stay out here and just ignore him the rest of the time. But it's a great meeting. I really appreciate you giving us the time, sharing your experiences, some of your knowledge, and your stories.
Thank you. It's been. I was flattered to be asked. I certainly don't want to position myself as having all the answers because I haven't got them.
None of us do.
None of us do. No, absolutely. And if there's anything anywhere in any of that's of use to anybody, then I'll be really pleased.
Well, like I said, thank you again. And like I said, I very much value other people's time. I know how important it is. So, I mean, thanks for making the trip down and hanging out with us for the better part of an hour here. And we'll go and hang out a little bit longer, and then I guess we'll talk again soon.
That's great. Thanks very much. Thank you.